Um, Back row, is this okay? Is this too loud? Check, check. Hello, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Sweet, thank you. On what? Welcome, everybody. My name is Matthew Robidoux. I'm the founder of Raiden Labs. I'm a full-time student at the University of Minnesota. These two gentlemen here happen to be two of my mentors. So the goal for today, really, with the hour that we have, is to kind of go over why cannabis research is so important for the industry, and really the pain points within getting that research accomplished, done, and sent out to the industry to be practically applied within the industry nationwide. So as we go through, this is a panel discussion, so feel free to ask any questions throughout. And we'll be kind of going through several topics relevant to our agenda. So the panelists today, starting with Dr. Tom Michaels. He's a breeder at the U of M, part of the Department of Horticultural Sciences. And he's been helping me for quite some time to really get into the cannabis side of things. And Dr. Nate Ahlens over here is assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Horticultural Sciences Department as well. And him and I have been working together on doing some undergrad research. So pretty exciting. And once again, these two gentlemen have really helped me just launch into this career path, and I'm very appreciative for them. Our third panelist that is not here today, unfortunately, because he was sick, is Dr. Clement Dabney. Doc Dabs, I'm sure most people are familiar with him in the industry, U of M grad as well. So we're going to miss his presence and stories today. So we're just going to jump into things with essentially a personal connection. So I'd like to ask both of our panelists essentially why cannabis is so important to you guys, what brought you here, and yeah, why are you here today? We'll start with
Sure. Thanks very much for coming out today. I have a pad of paper here that I'm hoping to fill with ideas that you have that I can steal, if you don't mind.
Me too.
So we're on the same page, aren't we? That's really good. So my enthusiasm about this is particularly in the research side. I'm a plant breeder and have done that since I started working at universities about 40 years ago. So we've been at it a long time with a lot of other food crops. But it wasn't until the change in the Farm Bill that resulted in pilot programs in industrial hemp, and particularly Minnesota's entry into a pilot program in 2018 that got me to start working with cannabis, because until then I couldn't. And a lot of it was actually driven by curiosity, because it is such an interesting crop in itself, from just, in a way, a struggle to work with, but a joy to work with too. And that's one of the things that I just wanted to mention about research, is a lot of it is about curiosity. You just working with this thing and want to know how it works. Another piece of it, though, that certainly comes to mind now as we have the rec cannabis laws now being, well, the legislation passed and now the rules being developed, is need that also drives research too. What is it that people need in order for this program to work in Minnesota? So those are two of it. What the curiosity and the need, and the third's opportunity. Where are the opportunities? And we'll talk a little bit about funding and grants and things of that sort in the future in this afternoon. But that's part of the opportunities. How do you actually get going? So I have to say I was kind of, Matt, driven a lot just by the curiosity, because it's a weird plant, right? It's dioecious. It's got male and female plants, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's monoecious or hermaphrodite. It is ridiculous as far as its pollen production. And so how in the world I'm doing it through the eyes of a breeder, so you'll hear me doing that a lot. But how in the world do you manage all that pollen and try not to get it on you so that you become sensitized? So little things like, plus also all the different things you can do with it. Even though I work with industrial hemp, we select for fiber, we select for grain. Now we're taking a look at cannabinoids, and one could do terpenes or other flavor. There's just so much to do in this. So, but I've got to save something to say for later. So.
Well, first, yes, thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for having us here. It's great to be here and to think that I might have something relevant to say. As Matt mentioned, I'm an assistant professor. I do controlled environment agriculture. So for those of you not familiar, it's most cannabis operations, right? It's everything indoors, greenhouses, the plant factories, vertical farms, you name it. A lot of my specialty comes in lighting. Around that, cannabis is a really interesting plant because one of my mentors, if you've ever watched a guy named Bruce Bugbee, he likens it to a race car. And it is truly the race car of the plant world. And when you look at the physiology of a plant like cannabis, it's just remarkable. Not only the things that it can do, but what it supplies us as well. And I'd second what Tom just said about the need. That's what interests me a lot here, is the fact that this is such a popular plant that a lot of people are interested in for many different reasons. You have your recreational side, your medicinal side, your fiber side, you have everything. And there's so many facets that this really magical plant can do. One thing that a lot of people don't even know about is in nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is basically, creating nanoparticles, electrical charges. There's a lot more into it, but graphene is a huge component of this, and we need graphene as a semiconductor. There's some researchers up in Alberta who actually found that the lattice of the hemp structure or cannabis structure can actually serve as graphene, where graphene is about $1,000 for 5 grams or something like that. You can get like 1,000 grams for $5 using hemp to do the same thing and create a very viable product. So yes, there's tons of interest around it, and like we said, the supply and demand is really interesting. But for me, as a controlled environments person, I need to make a disclaimer to everyone here too. I don't really grow cannabis. I'm more of that vegetable side of things. I'm a physiologist, a photobiologist, what's really cool about cannabis is a lot of these humble lettuce growers, we can afford LED lights thanks to the cannabis industry. And it does keep driving, down that path with all the technology that's coming through. I recently visited a firm in Sacramento back in April, and just the bells and whistles that are in there it's just so much fun to be in that space. And so for me, getting out there and talking to growers and getting hands-on with some of their technology that they're using is really exciting, and definitely makes me exceptionally interested in it. And I think regardless of your thoughts on cannabis, it's, as a horticulturist, I'd be an idiot not to be, have an eye on it. And so, yes, this is a very interesting crop. There are interesting possibilities, and hopefully we can drive this research. And why is research important? Well, because we kill plants so you don't have to. I think that's the big driving thing, is why we need to be out there, because You don't want to set up a bunch of lighting treatments where you know that you're going to kill a plant. But we do, because we like that data. And so that's part of the point of research. And I think we need to be around to help everyone else out. The University of Minnesota is a land grant university. We are set up to disseminate information. We are the ones who democratize information, really, scientific knowledge. And so it's important for us to do our job and disseminate that information to everyone who wants it.
So as you guys can tell, there's a lot of purpose. Excuse me. There's a lot of purpose here. Excuse the noise. We'll hopefully be able to figure that out. So just talking about the past, I know Dr. Ahlens had said he had not yet conducted any cannabis research. However, Dr. Michaels has been doing some interesting research here at the University of Minnesota. So, Dr. Michaels, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to, of course. I've already introduced myself as initially working with industrial hemp, and I have to tell you how I kind of got started in it. Because a lot of our research plots are far flung around the state. One of the things that's pretty obvious is that there are naturalized populations of cannabis around the state, right? And these stem from when cannabis was grown commonly as a fiber crop in the state. So you may know all of this stuff from settlement. It was grown as a fiber crop and also as a bird seed crop, because if you've grown cannabis outside, you know, the birds like it too. So as a bird seed crop and right up until the 30s, when the Marijuana Tax Act came along and really squelched a lot of that. And then all of a sudden World War II and the Philippines getting blockaded by Japan, and we couldn't get the raw material for rope. And we had this big hemp for victory exercise in the US that really boiled down to 1 year, 1943 of production, but a big whack of production in the Midwest. So anyway, these naturalized populations all come from that. And even if we take 1943 as our starting point, that's 70 years ago. It means that the hemp that's growing out there in these naturalized spots, the ditchweed, if you will, has been growing successfully without our intervention for 70 years. So there's something to that. That means we now have plants out there that are really well adapted to Minnesota in terms of their ability to flower at the right time. You know that, day length sensitivity, if you grow, is a big deal in cannabis production. So here we have a plant that can flower and grow well. In particular, let me get back to that flowering piece, in 16.5-hour days. So if you're familiar with production techniques and say, okay, you need to flip to 12-12 so you can flower and all that, the plants that are growing in Minnesota, because they've had to adapt and produce seeds so they can have progeny that will grow next year, have had to figure out a way to do it in really long days. So that's kind of interesting stuff, and probably they've got to be really good at managing cold weather and coming up early in the spring and having good germination and emergence and establishment. So anyway, for all of those sort of agronomic reasons, we decided to base our breeding program on this naturalized hemp. And I thought it was going to be an absolute, possibly a dead end, except for all of this ability to be adapted to Minnesota in our growing season. I thought, well, it was always grown for fiber, so there's not a chance that I'm going to really be able to do grain or cannabinoids or anything else from that. And we started this in 2019. And if I could, it's a little late to do this now because everything's been plowed under, but if I could take you out to my research nursery, I'd say, take a look at these grain plants over here. All of these were selected from ditchweed. Look at these fiber plants over here. Look at these ornamentals. That's something that nobody even talks about, but the opportunity eventually, eventually, when you don't have to have licenses to grow the stuff, and it doesn't have to be hidden behind enclosures, you know, you can get some really interesting, beautiful plants. Would be great in rain gardens and environmentally really cool. So, so our work essentially started with ditchweed, and that's all we've been working on. We're at the point now that we have some lines that we're putting into variety trials, and eventually are going to end up with new varieties. So it's been a really cool ride, all based on Minnesota material.
So we do have a question. We do have a question for Dr. Ahlens here, which is essentially, why is light research important for cannabis? I think there's something you can speak to.
Yes, I can really toot my own horn on this one. And part of that is really to supplement what Tom was just talking about. All these new varieties come out. We have this archaic thought that, yeah, you have to do 12 hours, you know, and create a short day in order to start flowering this plant. And this is just not necessarily true. You have different cultivars, some that we have bred purposefully, some that have evolved naturally in the wild. So doing this research will help us optimize these parameters. Optimizing what parameters? Well, to me, light is one of the most important parameters because it drives the optimization of everything else. If you put more light on your plant, you're going to need more water. You're going to need more nutrients. It's going to fixate more CO2. And so light is hugely important. It's almost like the baseline where you start your research is, can we optimize this? And now what happens to the rest of these parameters, and how are we going to optimize the rest of them? So to me, yeah, lighting is absolutely huge, especially on a plant that can take so much light. You look at a lettuce plant, we do these things called ACI curves. It's basically how much photosynthesis, net photosynthesis, based on how much light you're applying to these plants. And you look at lettuce, we're somewhere around 500. You get this saturation curve, 500 micromoles per meter squared per second. Don't worry about the units and all of that, but let's just say 500, where cannabis is getting saturated around 2,000. So 4 times the amount. And it's just, again, this race car, right? That just is hopped up on jet fuel. So it's really exciting, and being able to do that research not only lends to giving that information to everyone, because it's really hard to tell how much light you're putting on a cannabis plant and not knowing how much is too much. I can tell you that because we have a $60,000 piece of equipment that, you know, we can hook up to a leaf. And figure that out. But no farmer's going to go out and buy an infrared gas analyzer or something like that. Does anyone even know what that is? Exactly. No one should know what that is. You don't need that in any operation unless you're doing research. But we can go through and absolutely find out what some of these thresholds are, where these saturation points are in light, so that you're not putting too much on where you're getting diminished returns. Therefore, your energy bill is going way up. Or you're putting too little and you're not getting the full performance out of your plants as well, and your full yields that you should be able to expect. This is really important in terms of saving energy, your bottom line. You look right now, cannabis has been in, I'm going to say it's been in like a golden age for a while, which is funny because it's rocky with legalities and so forth. However, you look at some of these tomato growers or lettuce growers, the margins that they work on are a very, very fine line. And right now, cannabis is not that fine line yet. But in the future, it absolutely will be. And the people who stick around are going to be the people that can operate their facilities within maximum efficiency. And they are sparing no costs, and they are not wasting a dollar or a penny for that matter. Because when I look at lettuce and you save 1 penny on 10,000 heads, that translates to $100 every single time, 1 penny. And so it's just everything extrapolates. And like I said, the players that are going to stick around are those that can manage all of their resources very, very efficiently. And that's why research is going to be hugely important.
Awesome answer. So I'd like to remind the audience, if you guys do have any questions throughout, please raise your hand and we'll fit you in. And a reminder that we will have 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A. So write down any questions that you would like to save. So on to essentially some of the struggles around cannabis research. At the University of Minnesota, what areas have been done and what haven't been done? More specifically, what hasn't been done and why?
I like your answers. I'm going to send this thing over. The first thing I want to mention is kind of a shout out to the University of Minnesota for not blocking this sort of research. When I was interested in starting to work with cannabis, I was not the pioneer at doing this by any means. George Weiblin in plant molecular biology has been working with a DEA license, including with some drug type stuff, and doing work that has really uncovered genetic pathways that differentiate plants between CBD producers and THC producers. And just having that, knowing what that switch is and how it's thrown and how to detect it in plants without having to wait till they flower and mature and smoke them is just wonderful, because you can just do it with small pieces of tissue. So there has been work going on. And when I started getting involved and doing it in the field, I have to say, nobody said, maybe you shouldn't do that, Tom, or let's hide it over here, or you sure. It was like, go for it. So kudos to them for not. Now, there is, however, a bit of a problem because cannabis, not industrial hemp anymore. Up for a while, industrial hemp was, just like all cannabis, was a Schedule I controlled drug. So you hear about that being talked about now, but it's like the ultimate in, what the damage that it could. I don't know how you define Schedule I, except that it's highly addictive and that it's something to be avoided at all costs, I guess, including research. So all of the THC type cannabis is still on that schedule. Industrial hemp is not. But that's important to know because the university gets pretty skittish about research on a Schedule I drug because that's a federal law, and we do get a chunk of federal funding for research that we do. And so one of the things they are interested in us doing is making sure we don't commingle streams of funding that we use for our research. It's a minor thing, but it's a matter of keeping your budget straight and your activities within those budgets. And that they do want us to do. So if we were talking about one of the barriers, it's the fact that we have to be careful that if we have federal funds for something over here, not a bit of it is used for something that could be associated with, say, THC sort of work. Now, luckily, since the 2018 Farm Bill, industrial hemp is not part of Schedule I, so it's not so big a problem. But it was really one of the first things that I heard from some of our administrators who were responsible for managing dollars that were received from the state legislature that was associated with HF 100 and work that could be done at the university. Were saying, well, we have to make sure that we're not commingling those streams. So it's kind of a technical answer, Matt, but it's a realistic one that we just have to be careful of so long as things are Schedule I. If in fact what President Biden was talking about, moving it off of Schedule I to maybe Schedule III, that'll make a huge amount of difference for the sort of latitude that we have.
And as Tom praises the university, I praise Tom because as a new person, without question, everybody knows that there is a stigma around cannabis. And, you gotta look at my mom. She thinks, cannabis is as bad as heroin, basically. And, she just doesn't know. But it is people, mavericks like Tom, that give me the confidence to show up at this panel right here. When Matt asked me to do this, first person I emailed was Tom. I'm like, what should I do? I don't know if I can say yes to this. Some of my previous funding has been on the USDA. So that has been, you don't even mention cannabis to them. Again, for the Schedule I reasons that Tom just mentioned. So the fact that there are people like Tom within the university who is, pushing what has recently been considered taboo and pushing back on those people and saying, you know what, hey, I'm your peer and I can look you in the eye and tell you that this is not a big deal, versus a young guy looking at our dean or something. They're like, who are you? I could fire you tomorrow. So again, I just thank Tom.
Appreciate it.
I have something to say about Tom as well. I would not be here if it wasn't for him, to be honest, because every other professor that I had spoken to, I'm a junior at the U of M right now. So I started talking to Tom immediately when I started, like from the very beginning, because I was like, the timing of all this industry and everything is just too perfect. And that was prior to even the gummy legalization of, within Delta 9 hemp drive within gummies and beverages. That was prior to that. So Tom was really the first one to kind of incentivize me to continue to pursue my interest in cannabis science. And it just so happens that we made those changes throughout our, the legislation in Minnesota, which allowed me to continue pursuing that in more essentially higher levels, which is, now, like I had mentioned, I have my first cannabis research proposal in for undergraduate research, which is unheard of in this capacity. And I think it's fueling future generations of cannabis science. And I'm just really grateful to have the opportunity to be in the position I am. So thank you, Tom.
Are you taking comments from audience?
Yes, please.
Too? I come at this from a really different perspective. I'm an alcohol and drug counselor, and SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency, the federal agency, they've really kind of redefined substance use disorders in the last several years. And one of their biggest pushes is to use medication-assisted treatment for substance use. And, that might include methadone is the really old one. Suboxone is another one. There's Campril or naltrexone for alcohol. And there's a real place for cannabis in that. I guess I would really urge you not to worry too much about the stigma or keep pushing forward, because that's where the other end of an industry is going. If you have problems with substance use, they're really looking to identify that as a biologically based issue and looking at medication assisted treatment along with therapy and not looking at abstinence so much. And I'm saying that as a recovering alcoholic that doesn't use any kind of drugs. So don't worry about stigma, guys. I mean, really,
people have figured this out at home already.
Yeah.
So we just need it on paper.
Right. But you can tell other people too. It's you're being brave,
Yeah.
but I'm being brave, a totally abstinent person that comes here to find out about what's happening. So
Right. That's great to hear. I come from an interesting background too. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. And so obviously that's a very anti everything except for alcohol, because the Marine Corps was founded in a bar. So it's kind of a ironic situation that I found myself in. I had only used cannabis a few months before I had joined, and that thought of like confusion of why was that so enjoyable versus all my experiences with alcohol was a really interesting contrast. And I never stopped thinking about, like, through my entire time in that entire 5 years, I never stopped thinking about why was that better than what we are socially told to do and what is right, and why are my friends dying because of this socially acceptable variant. So it's really interesting to bring that up about, blowing through the stigma and what is stigma versus what is something we actually have to be cautious about, because I think there's a line there where we end up, maybe most of us end up leaning towards that stigma side, and then we notice and we continue to push on because we see the future is cannabis, and science is the way to understand whether that's good or not. So we're going to move on to collaborative initiatives. So really just talking about what do we need to do to bridge the gaps between the industry, the cannabis industry, and the research that is being put out.
Go ahead.
I can start that one. So one thing that I think is incredibly important is understanding industry needs. It's not just answering the questions, but it's also doing it in a way that's applicable. So before I went, let's see, I did my undergraduate back in Montana. I went off and worked in a lettuce farm down in Arkansas. And I was an operations manager down there for a handful of years. And that's what drove me back to school to get my master's and then go on and do my PhD and so forth. So every piece of research that I do, everything I want to be in line with what the commercial industry is doing. And I have seen in specific cannabis research happening that, they're using low light levels. And so you go to a farmer and you say, hey, look at, what far red light did on these cannabis plants. And they're like, well, your yield per square meter is 5 times less than what I get at the farm. Why am I supposed to listen to you? You're number one, you're not growing appropriately. Your light levels are far too low. So is this even applicable to what an industry grower is going to use? So for me, it's the step one of bridging that gap is always going out and talking to growers and understanding, trying to replicate exactly what they're doing. Research is also on a smaller scale. So how can we do that application and make it scalable to a larger size? So I think that is hugely important. And it all starts with going out and talking to stakeholders, people that are here, what is important to you? How do you do it? What are your kind of protocols? I know this is tough because a lot of people don't always want to share numbers, especially, pricing and especially in like the vegetable industry, it's ridiculous. Everyone's trying to reinvent the wheel themselves, and they're spending massive amounts of money doing it. And I think that going forward, especially here in Minnesota, there should be a really open science network at the university. We hope to be a hub for that, to exchange ideas. Places like this ought to be. But it's tough. Everyone's, at the end of the day, kind of competing businesses. They don't always want to share information. However, everyone's going to benefit if we do a lot more sharing at places like this. And so I highly encourage people to reach out to Tom and I, and talk about needs, what you're doing, how we could do it better, and just conveying that information amongst your peers as well.
So I want to do a little collaboration here because I'm really curious about the drug and alcohol counseling. Do you mind telling me your name?
Oh, Mary Retton.
Mary. Okay. So Mary, when you work with your clients or with the folks who come to you, I don't know if you talk about cannabis with them. What are the characteristics of cannabis that would best serve people who are using it in alcohol and addiction situations? Is there, because somehow, so where I'm going with this is, it probably isn't best served by programs where folks are trying to move their crop from 25% THC to 30% THC. Those are, there's a piece, there will always be that who's got the winner. But somehow I'm guessing from what I've read that other things are going to be important in the medicinal world. And I'm wondering if you have any anecdotal ideas about what has worked for people and what hasn't.
One of the I've been around for a long time because I'm old, and I worked on a psych unit like in 1990, and weed was just kind of something that was there. And then I went and did medical social work for 20 years and came back to the psychiatric unit, and all these young kids are coming in psychotic from weed. There was about 2.5 years there where it was crazy, and they were really psychotic, and they didn't get better in 4 days, and they didn't get better in 10 days. It was like 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks, and they were not necessarily the folks that you would expect to become schizophrenic, because that emerges those years as well. And I've got to think it's got to do with the increasing THC content. And I know like out in Oregon and other places like that, that's something that happens is psychosis. So now when I talk with folks, I'll tell them. I did a group last week and I said, you know, you can, if you're prone towards psychosis and you do a lot of high THC weed, that's going to happen. And some guy said, that happens to me all the time when I do lots of weed. And, you know, I mean, think how that affects somebody's life. So there's that. But reducing anxiety and PTSD and something for anxiety that isn't addictive, physically addictive. So.
Thanks. There's a comment behind you too. Thanks for commenting.
Hi, thank you. I'm Molly and I'm a cannabis nurse and I'm here with another one, Alicia. So why research is really important to us is we want to see the development of chemovars that can really be specific for people and they can hone in and dial into where they need to be with cannabis. Another thing is this psychosis issue. I think as nurses, we guide people and we educate them and we start them on a journey to using cannabis in a safe and effective way. And we help them titrate their dose of whatever it may be, if it's THC dominant, if it's CBD, if it's a 1-to-1, you know, so again, we want to see the development of those things. And I think safe and effective cannabis use always starts with a low dose and you just titrate up till you get to where you need to be. That's how we approach it as from a medical perspective. So as much as I support and love to see people using cannabis just to get high, you know, I also support that too. My thing is that I always say everyone who consumes cannabis is a medical patient because we're all just treating our own set of symptoms. So, you know, we just need to help people do that in a way that's safe and effective for them. So thank you.
Well done. Thanks so much for speaking up. Thanks. I was going to ask you to say
I
something.
just wanted to add to the psychosis.
Thank you, Molly. Big brain there, beautiful lady. So I want to add to the psychosis part. So I've been working in the medical world for some time throughout my life. And I've also been the mother of a son with a traumatic brain injury and then my own issues, my own medical journey. And some of my own medical journey, psychosis is a side effect. So at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Afrin was there for a while, and he was studying a condition called mast cell activation syndrome. And in his book, Don't Bet Against Achman, he speaks about cannabis being a mast cell stabilizer. Okay? I'm a little anxious, so hopefully I don't stumble through my words. So, thank you. So cannabis is a mast cell stabilizer, right? So some people are turning to drugs because they are not understanding what is going on inside of their brains. Whether we're having social anxiety, whether we're having these weird seizure anaphylactic moments that nobody understands, because part of that is psychosis. So if I go into, say, a Runnings and I smell some person's perfume or cologne, my mast cells will blow up in my brain. Well, that can only happen so much before psychosis hits. Okay. So I don't know what was happening back where she was at with the weeks and weeks of psychosis with weed, but I'm unsure if that was actually cannabis that they were using. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like that was laced with something that would cause a neurotoxin defect going on in the brain. So I don't have degrees because most of my university education was in my house because of my son or myself. But I would love to talk to you guys on a different platform there's so many things that science is needed for. And as far as recovery from addiction, one of the cool things about cannabis is we have this thing called the endocannabinoid system. I think we all in here know that. So cannabis, as our body, if we're doing alcohol, heroin, whatever, and we're trying to kill ourselves with that, but we're also using cannabis at the same time, that cannabis, all those cannabinoids are going to work in our system to keep our heart going. So that is one reason cannabis is beneficial in helping people get off of whatever they're on because it will help with the reduction of DTs. So there's a lot more that can be said on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, very interesting. There's shout out to Kayla Fearing. She owns Healing Fear Consulting, which deals with essentially opiate addicts moving off of opiates through the use of cannabis to support that. So a lot of evidence there. And you know, the panel today, there's a lot of cannabis science overall is incredibly lacking in research overall compared to really any other crop. And the interesting thing is that within cannabis, we have a lot more focus on the plant science and the medical science because there's the two sides of it. So us three are on the plant science side, so we understand really a lot of the medical side as well. But in terms of, you know, providing certain recommendations or anything, I mean, that's beyond the scope of today. However, I think that just highlights the one of the main purposes of this panel, which is the importance of cannabis science. Question in the back. Would you mind passing that?
Yes. So I guess in line with what the topics for today were, I had a couple questions talking about the research that you guys do. One question might be a quick answer and the other. So the first question I have is, will you be offering services for businesses? And you kind of answered it. Will you be offering services for businesses to kind of help optimize their growing operations and light research and things like that? And the second question would be, what type of energy increases are you seeing as you're applying, you know, your light sciences and things like that? Is it an exponential, or is it, you know, is it kind of different for each situation, or do you have it kind of mapped out already, kind of a recipe, a lighting recipe?
So I guess we'll do quick. Do you want to answer, since I think you have an answer on top of your head?
Yeah, sure
We'll go with the
thing.
light.
So in terms of the lighting and energy use, you know, some of what's really hard is to get above this threshold of 1500 micromoles. You are running some big lights to do this, some high power. But if you go outside in the summer at solar noon and put a light meter out there, a quantum sensor, you're going to get about 2000. So obviously, you know, these plants can take quite a bit. And what we've seen in some research, up to 1500 micromoles of light, we have almost a linear increase in yields. Beyond that, what we can extrapolate is to continue that, to be honest with you. And yes, there are more energy demands, but yields are making up for it right now. And that is because of the price structure currently. And that would be kind of the short answer to that. There's a lot more to it, you know, in terms of strategies that you can use. One of which is, can you start working not a 9-to-5 job, but, you know, the other 9-to-5, the off-peak times. So there's a lot of states. I don't know if Minnesota actually has this, but I know California has been pretty great about it, but off-peak times. So if you are running your lights through the night, then they're willing to give you a significant reduction in your energy costs. And so this is just adding to different strategies that you can, and areas that you can go down that direction. And in terms of recipes of lights, if you're talking about like the spectral distribution colors as we're moving into like LED lights versus, you know, in the past, we've been running metal halide lights, which are about 30% blue. And then into the high pressure sodium for the flowering has been pretty typical. Sorry, metal halide for veg, HPS for the flowering portion, you move down to about 4% blue. And the reason behind this is not necessarily the spectrum, but because it's a more energy efficient light. And this has changed as technology has changed. However, these high intensity discharge gaseous phase lights like metal halide and high pressure sodium are kind of going out because they have hit their max efficacy in terms of physics. Efficacy relates to the amount of energy input based on the photon output of that light. So when we're trying, this is usually measured in like micromoles output per watt per second. Watt per second is a joule, so micromoles per joule. And this is something when buying lights, everyone should be aware of, is this efficacy, this micromole per joule. A high pressure sodium light is going to be about 1.72 micromoles per joule of energy, whereas some of these LEDs now, you're looking at easy 2.5. That's like some of the minimums on the market right now. You can get as high as 4, but you're running into your magenta hue, which not a lot of people like to work under, what other people call it blurple, but it's not that these lights are necessarily bad. I personally like a broad spectrum light that has some green in there, makes it a white spectrum. So it looks like human lighting space, essentially. It's easier to scout for pests and disease. You can see what's happening in your crop. You can actually see a true color in it. So if you're getting some chlorosis, maybe you have a nutrient deficiency. So far research, what we've seen is spectrum hasn't been having huge effects. So in terms of recommendation, high efficacy. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay. But I did just want to say one more thing. The previous question you had asked was about collaboration between industry and research. But we did forget what you ladies brought up was the consumer. And what is the consumer's needs? And I totally blew by that. And I was like, oh, of course, it really goes down to, yes, this is supply and demand, but we do have to say, what does a recreational consumer want? What does a medicinal consumer want? And within just those two realms, there's a huge spectrum, right? Right, but it's going to take collaboration as well, not just with plant scientists, but with human physiologists, right? And people in the medical field. So this isn't just a plant science thing. It's, identifying those targets and then, having a human physiologist per se, okay, it's the Delta 9 that's going to help for XYZ. And now it goes back to Tom, and Tom breeds that plant and then sends it to me. And I, work out the SOPs on how to maximize that. And then, well, whatever it is, I'm just being arbitrary here. But in that case, that's just another realm of that, and where collaboration ought to go is just, it should be all encompassing and involve everyone involved.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
It takes research to
Right.
understand what people need.
Well, oh, yeah, this will be the last question. We got to wrap it up here.
Are your research results available publicly?
I'll let you hit
Yeah.
that since you're.
Yeah, we publish our material. Well, we will publish our material publicly. So absolutely. One of the other thing when we take a look about what is my research? My research is the seeds in a way. It's the ultimate. And one of the things I'm very interested in doing is making them widely available. My first idea was simply to take, especially the stitchweed, and get it a little bit up to speed so other breeders can use. I'm not a big intellectual property hoarding sort of person. In fact, I'm part of a group called OSSI, the Open Source Seed Initiative, and our whole gig is to make seeds available for anybody to use widely. And so that's kind of the approach that I have, and I'm looking forward. I mean, I went out in farmers' fields and gathered this stuff, so it's not as if I have proprietary claim over it, for heaven's sakes, So anyway, I don't want to try to pretend I do. So yes, we do make our material widely. Now, there's some except we do some contract research too occasionally, and this came up, was a question before, do we work with growers? And so for instance, I've worked just recently with a robotics company that's developing an arm that goes across the plants indoors, and we're testing that for them, things like that. In those sort of situations, we develop a contract that allows them first perhaps to do some proprietary things, but ultimately we're able to publish it. So sometimes there's a little delay.
And I would just second that and say that I mentioned previously that the University of Minnesota is a land grant institution. And our job is to democratize scientific information. So if we don't do it, we're not doing a good job at our job.
All right. Any final thoughts?
I got one thing I gotta say. You ever have rabbit holes that you go down? All the time, right? That's that curiosity. And I just love that. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I could talk about just in terms of using that with students. But one of the rabbit holes I went down was the history of hemp in Minnesota. And so I'll just leave you with this sort of, I'm not the first hemp breeder at the University of Minnesota. Back at the turn of from late 1800s, like 1895 or something through the teens, there was a guy whose name was Coates Bull. And Coates Bull was a teacher at the then called Minnesota Agricultural College. It was still where we are in St. Paul, same sort of place. And he was actually called out in a positive way by the USDA fiber breeder outside of Washington, saying Coates Bull and his program at the University of Minnesota is the most modern breeding program in the US right now. And he developed a variety of fiber hemp called Minnesota number 8, which nobody has heard of since, and that I cannot find a trace of, which when you know the biology of the crop, you go, yeah, that makes sense. So anyway, Coates Bull was way ahead of our program. The last thing I'll leave you with, unfortunately, we're kind of breeding hemp in a way that he would recognize, and that's sick. We should, when you think about what research needs to do, it's to bring hemp breeding into the 21st century. So I'll just.
Well, thank you very much. We're just finishing up really quick. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Just want to thank Canna Connect. Steve did a great job in this event. Appreciate everybody being here, and take care.